Grigory Rasputin was born a peasant in Siberia. He arrived in St. Petersburg in 1903 with no connections, no money, and no formal education. Within a few years, he had access to the innermost circle of the Russian imperial family. This was not because of manipulation or blackmail. It was because of something no doctor could explain. He could stop bleeding without medicine, without bandages, without any method that science could account for. In the imperial family, this was not a curiosity. It was a matter of life and death. Crown Prince Alexei, the Tsar's only son and heir to the Russian throne, suffered from hemophilia. Any internal bleeding could kill him. Any fall, any bruise, any minor injury could become a medical emergency. The Empress lived in constant, exhausting terror. Rasputin had saved the boy's life on multiple documented occasions, stopping bleeding that doctors had been unable to control. For a mother who watched her child come close to death repeatedly, this man was irreplaceable. And the enemies of the Tsar understood exactly what that meant. Alexander Guchkov was an industrialist, chairman of the Military-Industrial Committee, and one of the most determined enemies of Nicholas II. He obtained letters allegedly written by the Empress and the royal daughters to Rasputin. The letters were almost certainly forged or heavily altered. It did not matter. Guchkov had them copied on printing machines and distributed across Russia as proof that Rasputin controlled the imperial family, and therefore controlled Russia itself. Nicholas II found out. He sent Guchkov a message through his war minister. The message was 4 words. Guchkov is a scoundrel. Guchkov kept working. By 1915, the Rasputin hysteria had consumed the press entirely. He was called a German spy, a secret ruler of Russia, the evil genius destroying the empire from within. None of these accusations were ever proven. All of them were repeated until they became accepted as truth. The opposition had discovered something that every modern political operation understands intuitively. In wartime, a compelling story is more powerful than any fact. A lie told loudly enough, and often enough, stops being a lie. It becomes the narrative. The reality of Rasputin was far more complicated than the cartoon the opposition created. His actual political influence was minimal. The ministers he supposedly appointed were recommended by others. The decisions he allegedly made were made by the Tsar alone. But the myth was more useful than the man. A filthy Siberian peasant manipulating the Empress, and through her the entire empire. This image did more damage to the Romanov dynasty than any military defeat could have. It made the Tsar look weak. It made the Empress look treacherous. And it made revolution look like salvation. By 1916, the Rasputin propaganda had reached even inside the Romanov family itself. Several Grand Dukes believed the stories. They sent memorandums to Nicholas demanding Rasputin's removal. They had private meetings with opposition politicians. Some discussed forcing a change of government. The Tsar read the memorandums, set them aside, and said nothing. He did not believe the accusations. He did not fire Rasputin, and his silence was interpreted by enemies and allies alike as weakness. In December 1916, Rasputin was murdered. The primary conspirator was Prince Felix Yusupov. one of the wealthiest men in Russia, married to the Tsar's niece. A member of the imperial family, Grand Duke Dmitry Pavlovich, was also involved. The murder was conducted in the basement of the Yusupov Palace. The details, poison, bullets, the frozen river, became the stuff of legend. By the following morning, Petrograd already knew. Newspapers began naming names within days. The investigation was a performance. Evidence was confused. Witnesses gave contradictory statements. The imperial family pressured for leniency. The conspirators were exiled, not imprisoned, not executed, exiled to their country estates and comfortable foreign postings. The message this sent throughout Russia was unambiguous. Even murder went unpunished when the victim was Rasputin. Even the Tsar could not enforce his own justice inside his own family. The dynasty was visibly cracking, not from outside pressure, but from within. In the days after the murder, Petrograd celebrated, not publicly, but in the drawing rooms, the clubs, the corridors of the Duma. People spoke openly about how Russia had been saved from the evil mystic. The foreign ambassadors sent dispatches home expressing cautious optimism. The opposition saw it as proof that bold action against the government was possible without serious consequence. They were already planning the next step, and the next step was not another murder. It was a coup. Alexander Guchkov and a small group of military officers had been planning an actual palace coup since at least 1916. The plan was to intercept the Tsar's train, force him to abdicate in favor of his son, and install themselves as regents. They believed they could manage a controlled transfer of power. They believed they could direct the revolution from above, contain it, and hand Russia a constitutional monarchy on their own terms. They were about to discover that revolutions do not stay contained. They never do. The man Germany chose to organize the destruction of Russia from within was Alexander Parvus. His real name, Israel Lazarovich Gelfand, a Russian-born businessman and former socialist who had spent years building connections inside the European left. He knew Lenin personally. He understood the revolutionary networks, and he had a plan. He went to the German Foreign Ministry and proposed a comprehensive program of subversion, propaganda, strikes, political agitation, and direct financial support to the Bolsheviks. Parvus requested 5 million gold marks from the German Foreign Ministry. He received 2 million immediately, with more to follow. The money moved through a network of shell companies and front banks across neutral countries: Sweden, Switzerland, Denmark. Enormous sums were reportedly transferred to the Bolshevik Party through these channels. How much exactly reached Lenin's organization has never been precisely established. But the German Foreign Ministry's own internal documents, discovered after the war, confirmed that the funding was real, substantial, and deliberate. Vladimir Lenin had been calling for Russia's defeat in the war since the very first day of fighting. His position was not popular, even among his fellow revolutionaries, but it was perfectly aligned with German interests. From his Swiss exile, Lenin wrote that the only progressive outcome of the war was for it to be transformed into a civil war, a revolution that would topple the Tsar and give the Bolsheviks power. German money and Bolshevik ambition had found each other at exactly the right moment.
But Germany was not the only foreign power working to bring down the Russian government. Britain and France were running their own operation. Their target was not the Tsar himself, not yet, but his Prime Minister, Boris Stürmer. Stürmer had done something that made him dangerous to London and Paris. He had negotiated terms under which Russia, after the war's victory, would receive control of Constantinople and the Black Sea Straits. Britain and France found these terms completely unacceptable. They began working to remove him. The British Embassy in Petrograd, under Ambassador George Buchanan, became a center of active interference in Russian domestic politics. Buchanan cultivated relationships with liberal opposition leaders, encouraged their political activities, and provided what a modern intelligence analyst would recognize as operational support. The French embassy did the same. Both countries wanted a Russian liberal government that would be more pliant in post-war negotiations and less likely to claim Constantinople. The director of Russia's police department, Vasiliev, wrote in an internal report, "If the British Foreign Ministry ever releases documents from its archives, this will cast the patriotism of Milyukov in a new and not especially favorable light." Pavel Milyukov, leader of the Constitutional Democrats, the most prominent opposition politician in Russia, had close, documented ties to British diplomatic circles. He was not working for the British, but their interests aligned perfectly, and alignment in intelligence work is indistinguishable from cooperation. On November 1st, 1916, Pavel Milyukov stepped to the Duma podium with a speech that had been constructed, by his own later admission, with the assistance of the British and French embassies. His target was Prime Minister Stürmer. His weapon was the most dangerous accusation in wartime. Mixing documented facts with deliberate inventions, he accused Stürmer and the Empress herself of secretly preparing a separate peace with Germany. He ended the speech with 5 words that echoed across Russia. Is this stupidity or treason? Stürmer was dismissed within weeks. The opposition celebrated. Years later, in exile, Milyukov wrote about that speech with a candor that is extraordinary. He wrote, "The firm decision to use the war to produce a coup was taken by us soon after the war began. We could not wait any longer, because we knew that in late April or early May, our army was scheduled to launch a major offensive. The results of that offensive would have ended all talk of discontent and caused an explosion of patriotism across Russia. They could not allow Russia to win the war." After Stürmer came the revolving door. The next prime minister lasted 1 month. Then came a man with almost no ministerial experience. In just 3 years of war, Russia saw 4 prime ministers, 6 interior ministers, 3 war ministers. Each removal was celebrated by the opposition as a victory. Each new appointment was immediately attacked. The government was not failing. It was being failed, systematically, deliberately, from outside and within. And the man at the center of it, Nicholas II, kept trying to find compromise, with people who had decided that no compromise would serve their purpose. By the end of 1916, Russia had enemies operating on every level simultaneously. Germany was funding subversion through Parvus and the Bolsheviks. Britain and France were funding political destabilization through the liberal opposition. Inside Russia, industrialists were financing revolutionary literature. Inside the Duma, politicians were deliberately sabotaging the government during wartime. Inside the army, conspirators were planning a coup. And inside the royal family itself, Grand Dukes were discussing how to remove the Tsar. This was not a revolution building from below. This was a demolition, being conducted from every direction at once. As 1916 drew to its close, Petrograd felt different. The people who lived there could feel it. Something in the air had changed. The newspapers were full of terrible rumors. The British and French embassies were hosting opposition politicians almost nightly. At the front, the army was preparing what they believed would be the decisive spring offensive of 1917. And in private rooms across the city, the conspirators were holding their final meetings. Everyone seemed to know that something was about to happen. Nobody knew exactly what. Nicholas II knew most of what was happening. His secret police reported on the conspiracies. His diplomats told him about the foreign interference. His family members warned him about the political situation. He was not blind to the danger. But in his mind, shaped by his upbringing, his faith, and his unshakable sense of personal duty, the war had to come first. He had a phrase he repeated to himself and to those around him. "We will drive out the Germans. Then I will deal with internal affairs." There is something both deeply admirable and deeply tragic about that phrase. Admirable because it came from genuine selflessness. He truly believed that the war had to be won first, that Russia's soldiers deserved a Tsar who kept his eyes on the external enemy. Tragic because it meant he consistently underestimated the internal one. By the time the Germans were driven out, which, militarily, was becoming more and more possible, there might be nothing left to come back to. The internal affairs had decided to deal with him first. The people who knew Nicholas II personally, not as a political figure but as a man, described someone of genuine kindness, deep intelligence, and an almost overwhelming sense of personal responsibility. He was a devoted father to 5 children. He was a faithful husband in an era when fidelity among royalty was rare. He wrote in his diary every single day, not for posterity, but because it was a private discipline he maintained his entire life. These details matter because what was about to happen to him and his family was not justice. It was calculated destruction. On December 31st, 1916, as the rest of Petrograd prepared to mark the new year, Nicholas II sat down and opened his diary. He had been writing in it since childhood. Every day, without exception, he had recorded what had happened. The weather, the meetings, the meals, the prayers. The small details of a life lived entirely in public. On this particular night, at the end of the most dangerous year Russia had faced in a century, he wrote very few words. But they were the right ones. He wrote, "We prayed fervently that God would have mercy on Russia." 7 words, that was all. He closed the diary. He went to his family. He said his prayers. He slept. He had no idea, none at all, that 1917 would be the last year of the Romanov dynasty, the last year of the empire, and the last full year of his life. He was a man of faith, facing something that faith alone could not stop. Germany had paid. Britain had conspired. The industrialists had funded the pamphlets. The opposition had planned the coup. The propaganda had done its work. Rasputin was dead. The government was paralyzed. And somewhere in Zurich, in a small apartment lined with books and revolutionary manifestos, a man named Lenin was reading the morning newspapers and waiting for his moment. 1917 had begun, and it would end in a way that nobody, not the Tsar, not the opposition, not Lenin himself, had fully anticipated. That story begins.